6:44, and I now call this meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board of Directors to order. We are now, does somebody have the language, because I don't have it up yet? Thank you. We are now going to move into executive session under ORS 192.6602H to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. If we have an audience online, we expect to start regular session at 7 o'clock. Thank you. And members are present. Hi, Derek, we see you online. Agenda review is next. I'll take a motion.
I move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as published. I don't think we'll talk about it.
Josh?
Yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Derek?
Yes.
Owen?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
All in favor?
All right. Item 5 is the bond update. Scott's going to present to us.
Thank you, Jennifer and board. Tonight, you're going to be presented with the election resolution to place a general obligation bond on the ballot for November 2023. This is really monumental. The train is leaving the station. We have just over 100 days to that election, and there has to be a lot of things done and done well from now until that time. So I've asked Jeremy Wright from Wright Public Affairs, who is our expert in election campaigns. We've been working with Jeremy for about a year now. He's going to walk you through the election resolution and also talk to you a little bit about timelines, a little bit about do's and don'ts for board members. This is really, really important for the board to give its full attention to what Jeremy has to say. This won't be the only time we'll have Jeremy here. He will be working very closely with us for the rest of the way. Where Wenaha worked really closely with us up to this point, now Jeremy has received the baton from them. Having said that, and then when Jeremy's through, I'd like for Jennifer to share a little bit about what's going on with our Political Action Committee. It's another very key piece in passing a bond, is an effective PAC. So welcome, Jeremy. It's nice to have you here. I can go ahead and turn it over to you.
Good to be here. Just so I'm clear, Scott, are we walking through the bond language today, or is it that we've seen that and this is more about, I can just jump right into conversation about next steps?
Hi, Jeremy. I think it's been posted since Wednesday, so I think it would just be make sure there's any clarifications, questions that the board might have just quickly, as well as if you can just, as part of next steps, talk about what the other legal filings are before you kind of get into do's and don'ts.
Sure, happy to do that. So you have the language in front of you. Are there any questions or concerns or thoughts on what you have? All right. So the next steps is once you approve this language tonight, we go ahead and file what's called SCL 803 with your county elections office. And what that does is trigger a 2-week public comment period. That public comment period is what the public can, what it means is they can have input on what they think of your language filed. Once that's done, the 2-week, we then go ahead and submit SCL 803, pardon me, because it's opposite 805 is what you do first, and then 803. And that 803 is what actually instructs the county elections officer to put your measure on the ballot, your bond measure on the ballot. And from there, you will receive a measure number, and then we will, and then we move forward towards the election. So you should have a measure number in about the next 3 weeks at the outside, provided we file shortly, tomorrow or the next day after receiving your approval tonight of the language. Just a reminder on the language, you have 10 words caption, 20 words question, 175 words for your summary. And your local election county for this special elections in November is not doing an explanatory statement, a voters pamphlet explanatory statement, so that we do not need to do the 500-word explanatory statement, which would be something you would have to file with your SEL 803. So those are the next steps legally. Let's talk a little bit about next steps with the district and the board. I have sharing privileges here. Okay, if I could get sharing privileges, is that possible?
Yeah, Daniel, get that for you.
Okay, awesome. This, so they're super short, but I always just use this image just to guide our conversation today. So people often ask, how do you get to election day and what are the roles of the campaign and the PAC and the district? And so I use this image as this is our 2 tracks of effort taking us all the way through election day. On the left, we have the district, the Silver Falls School District, doing its effort and work to put us into a positive position. And on the right, you have your PAC and the, which is also known as the campaign, doing its work. So what is the district's main goals here? What are going to be our main goals coming in the next 100 days, as Scott alluded to? Must stick, first thing, legally, the district must stick to just the facts. So you cannot, as a school district, advocate or do any sort of use any public funds to advocate for the bond. However, you can educate the community about the need, and your second goal is to focus on parents. So, our 2 main goals as a school district is really building the case around why you are doing this. And so that's going to be a lot about, basic community education. And goal number 2 is to focus on the parents, because that is the main constituency you have that you work with every day. So what does must just stick with the facts means? These are activities and support. They include community-wide mailers. So a school district can educate the community about what the bond, but you have to send the stuff to every single voter. So that's one of the things we're going to be doing. We're doing social media, we're using flyers and postcards about factual information about the bond. We're doing videos. We're going to do school-specific info. There's going to be school-based signage. There'll be principal letters home about the bond specifically for every school. There's going to be info at school events. Obviously, a lot of opportunities there, and a lot of community presentations. We've already done a number of those, but both the district and Scott and the board, y'all be out there doing educating about the bond. And then the PAC, what is their role? Well, they're the moral voice, right? They advocate. They're advocates. They vote yes. It's telling people get out there and support this thing. So their goal is going to be to turn out the base and then persuade the persuadables. And what does that mean? Means obviously the PAC, unlike the school district that I just talked about previously, who has to talk to all voters and educate everyone, the PAC has the opportunity to actually target what you call your base voters, people most inclined to support you, and then the persuadables. And those activities they're going to do and support typically do like targeted mailers, advocacy flyers, commercials, vote yes signage, canvassing, texts and phone banks, endorsements, fundraising events, all those typical campaign activities. So, going back to, the initial picture, you can see how the 2 of them, while they cannot legally work in concert with each other, you will be the district and the political action committee will be providing information and advocacy all the way through election day. In terms of the board's role in all this is you as elected members are clear advocates for this bond. You have the voice and ability to, in any space, advocate a yes vote for your measure. because you are not public employees and because you are not paid by the district, you do not have to follow ORS 26432, which is the law that governs public bodies and public employees around political activity. So your role here is going to be as supportive as possible for the bond. Ideally, everyone pitching in some role or manner to support. And in many cases, say Scott is presenting, the superintendent is presenting at a, the Grange or a chamber event, that a board member goes along to be able to stand up and say, he presented the facts. Remember that side of the train tracks. Now I'm talking about this side, which is now we need your support, and here's why you need to vote yes. That's one of the, we see a lot of best practices. That's one of the key activities of board members, because each of you have been elected. Each of you have your own constituency that supports you, who understand you, and you are a trusted messenger. And so your role here is going to be really key because of that in getting people to both turn out and support this critical measure for your students. I will stop there and see if there's any questions.
Questions from the board?
I think we're pretty clear.
You said parents. What about teachers?
Yes, I'm sorry. So teachers are obviously critical and important part of our effort. I would say that most of the work that we do, that I've seen done with bond campaigns, engaging teachers has been on the district can provide basic factual information, but a lot of times the teachers and their union want to be involved on the political side. Like they want to be involved in the campaign, and the campaign absolutely should engage the local and state and bring teachers into this conversation, because obviously they're impacted as much as students, especially when you're talking about student and staff safety around safer schools. That is a critical issue for a lot of educators and classified staff as well. I would be remiss not to talk about them. So they typically plug in this effort on the campaign side, but we will certainly make sure as a school district that we're providing them with clear, concise, accessible information that they can provide to parents. You'll note that I think one of the things is obviously the closer, if you're talking about parents understanding and embracing what we're doing here, the closer you can get to their kids' classroom, the better. Just because as a parent myself, I always open that email from my parent's teacher. I sometimes open it from the principal, the school district, no offense, that's about 50-50, right? And so just because that's what we do. So the closer you can get that interaction around the bond to parents where they access the school, the better.
We do have a policy around political involvement that would come into play with teachers. So when they're on the job,
Yes.
they don't. They just provide facts. But if they're not on the clock, then it's permissible for them to participate in the campaign side, the PAC side.
So let's just say we had a canvassing opportunity on a weekend. Teachers could participate because it's not on school time.
100%.
That would include their social media as well?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's personal.
Yeah, so all public employees, there's been a number of findings by the state Supreme Court, and caution, I'm not a lawyer, just play one on TV, but that you do, it's been, I've been around this enough that, they have First Amendment private, citizen rights, and one of those is when they're not being paid. So we will put out, and we've already provided the district with a best practices for the do's and don'ts for public employees. Number one thing is just don't advocate on public time, right? Like if you're being paid, you don't get out there and advocate yes votes in the middle of the school day or whatever. But in the number one place we see some folks get in trouble with that is social media, someone just mentioned, right? Like posting using school computers or whatever.
We had a conversation earlier too with, with the PAC this afternoon, our classified association, our licensed association, they can, put messages out in favor of the bond all they'd like to. We collectively as a board could, and again, I'm not gonna speak for everybody, but myself, saying, I think we should put something together and advocate for the bond. We are free to do that, because we are separate from the district. So we can do that, and we should do that.
Before we move too much further, I did want to just clarify that Steve probably was in on this a lot. Maybe you were the lead on this. I don't know, but the resolution that you see in front of us has been worked on and 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 worked on by a lot of people, including Jeremy and attorneys. Like, this is like a big deal. And so I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that at all, about that process, but I just want to make sure that people know what went into it.
Yeah, Jeremy took the lead for us, and then we quickly got Carol McCoog from Hawkins, they're our bond counsel, involved, and Cassie was watching it too. Jeremy, I don't know if you want to kind of explain how that comes together, but.
And then Carol Samuels and Lauren McMillan from Piper. It's just a team. We think about that table, and literally doing a presentation on bond language tomorrow out in Bend and OSBA with Lauren from Piper. But this is your contract with voters. So what we put into this is the thing that you have to deliver. And so that is why you have so many eyes on it, both from the district side and from consultant side, just because, this is, like I said, it's a contract. And the language that you're voting on tonight is chosen both for precision and accuracy around what you're going to do with this building, and trying to adhere to 175 words and 20 words in 10 minutes. So it's not perfect English in terms of grammar, because we're trying to cram as much stuff in there, but it is accepted kind of how you design these things.
And so any of the factual information pieces that come from the district, I think I've heard you mention before, all come from this document. Like, this is the genesis of those kinds of pieces.
It's the genesis. We'll expand on it, obviously, when we have a few more than 175 words, but it is the foundational basis of, since so many eyes have been on it, legal counsel, board vote, everyone has taken their put their input, and the public has had a chance to make their input in the 2-week public comment period. So that, yeah, this is your foundational for the stuff that we'll put out later.
Thank you.
I had a question on some of the language on the resolution. Is that appropriate now to ask? Okay.
I think so.
On the actual resolution itself, the third paragraph down, and this is referring to the Awesome Grant. The language, I think, says the district has applied for the Awesome Grant and will receive. Is there any way to kind of like, is there any more to way to strengthen that language? I know we're in a word count problem, because we have been approved for the Awesome Grant. Is there any way to strengthen that language and just say, whereas the district is awarded, has already been awarded the money?
There's another version that includes that on board vote.
I think you did read the current one, because you said will, and
Oh, okay.
that was
Yeah.
what the change was.
Yeah.
Instead of may receive up to, it is will receive.
Well, so the district
4
has
million, but-
applied.
Yeah, the has applied isn't necessarily needed anymore. I guess we didn't look at that part of the sentence.
Or the
but-
district is awarded, has been awarded. So, I don't know, it just strengthens, it, in my opinion, like, the fact that we know that we're getting the Awesome Grant, we've been approved.
Yeah, and that was what the change to will receive if
Okay.
the bond is approved, but we could amend the first part of the sentence, because that probably doesn't need to be worded the
Yeah.
way that it is anymore.
I do have a question, Steve. We said the email, or we talked about how we changed the interest rate to save a lot of,
You mean the term? from
Yeah,
31 years to 26 years.
Significantly, I think it was like $50 million
Yes.
in interest.
Mhm.
In here, it still says $1.60 per thousand, and I thought somewhere it was
Yeah.
165.
That's
Does
a
that
great.
have to change in the?
No, this is correct,
Okay.
and that is an excellent question. So the 160 is the amount of increase above the current year's property tax. So your
Mhm.
November 2022 property tax, the average was $2.02 per thousand.
Mhm.
It would increase $1.60 to $3.62 per thousand. The projected rate for this November statement to 23-24 year is $1.97 per thousand, which would be an increase of $1.65. So it's an increase of $1.65 per thousand over the projected rate. It's an increase of $1.60 over the current, the most recent actual rate. So that was the way that it needed to be worded in this document, was in Exhibit A,
Okay.
was the $1.60 per thousand above the current rate. But either way, so there is a graphic now posted in the FAQ section of the bond webpage, which is something I had sent out. It was, I think, an excellent graphic that Cassie designed during the Tell Us What You Think session. So what I did was I pulled that graphic out of the slideshow, updated it based on the 26-year term, because when we were going through the Tell Us What You Think sessions, we were still thinking it was going to be a 31-year term and an increase of $1.53. So the graphic that I think will need to be used, because the pictures really make it easier to understand when we talk to people, that graphic is updated based on this 26-year term. Thank you for asking that, Josh, because that is very, very important.
One thing too that I think is important to consider is that the estimate, or this is an estimated number,
Mhm.
and that over time,
Mhm.
it could decrease like it did for the bond to finish this high school.
Yes.
That what was on the ballot is not what we're paying now. We're paying much less now because of
Mhm.
the increase in assessed value, the spread across the district, plus the refinancing that the district did.
Right. Kyle, thank you for bringing that up too, Jennifer. Kyle Palmer, who was part of that effort, believed that the advertised rate for that was somewhere in the 235 to 240 range, once the phase one had retired.
And we're paying
And yeah,
202
and now
most
we're all the way
recently.
down to 202 because of the things that you mentioned. Yeah, but it just can't be guaranteed. And this increased rate, we're not saying that rate stays static the whole time, because there's no way to predict exactly how much assessed value would grow from year to year. But as we know, Piper's very conservative. They build in a 1.5% or 150 basis point cushion to their interest. So this interest rate and cost is based on that higher number at this point. But we just can't make any promises. If I'm misspeaking, Jeremy, please let me know.
No, you're saying everything correct. Only thing I'll add is that when I talked about the contract with the voters and what we file is the Exhibit A today. The motion, the resolution is a Silver Falls School District document.
Got it. Good point.
So I would agree, Aaron, that sentence in the resolution could be probably worded a little better now that we know
Yeah,
the 4 million is coming. But if you look at Exhibit A, at the beginning of the 175 words, it
Yeah.
does say Silver Falls School District proposes a bond not exceeding 138 million, will receive $4 million state grant if approved.
All right, any other questions at this juncture?
Would it be worth it to mention that if interest rates do that again, that we will look into refinancing?
Are you talking about in the exhibit?
I'm just thinking, like, trying to head off people think that we're not wise or with the money like you've been, and getting the messaging out there.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we're allowed to in the exhibit. I guess Jeremy and Carol could tell us that, but I know that I've listed that as something that I really want to be out there as one of our key talking points is information. Did you know? we refinanced in 2013 and 2020, and how much interest we saved.
Mhm.
That's just a
Yeah.
fact,
Mhm.
and that needs to be out there.
Well, we may
And,
not be able to include it in the wording, Josh, but I think that's, again, to Steve's point, that's part of the landmark, so why do you vote for the bond, right? Look, we demonstrated fiscal responsibility over the last several years in refinancing some of our obligations and saving a ton of money. So this is always on the table for this bond as well. But I think that's a key point that we get out to the public.
And it's interesting too, if people say, well, you were saying 153 and now it's 160, 165 increase, maybe. Again, that's what we know right now, but right now for a 12-cent difference, we'll save $50 million of interest over, by making it 5 years less, which is why the BAC decided to go that route. But it's possible, if interest rates don't eat up that cushion between now and the time the bonds would be sold, it's possible that rate could be at or below what the 31-year advertised increase was, potentially.
Mhm.
But I mean, again, we can't say that that's going to happen for sure.
Any other questions or comments for Jeremy?
Nope, thanks. Good work, team. I know a lot of people have looked at this.
Thank you, Jeremy,
you.
very much.
Thanks for all your
joining
help,
us this
Jeremy.
evening.
Of course, I'll hang
Thank you,
around.
Jeremy. Talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Great. And Jennifer, would you like to give your colleagues an update on the meeting that you went to today about the
I
Pat.
can, and Owen and Aaron were there as well. So we had the maximum number of board participants that we could have. We met via Zoom with Jeremy. About 10, 11 people were on the call. And Jeremy walked us through, like, these are the important kinds of things that folks who are involved in this effort will take on. He explained the difference between what the district can do and what the PAC can do and why the PAC is important. And I think the big part that I'm really excited about is that two people stepped up to agree to co-chair the effort, and that is Celeste Richardson and Leah Rue. So we've got two people who have agreed to be in charge. So I actually had to leave the meeting. I left my computer running because I didn't have time to change who was the host on the Zoom. And maybe they're still meeting, I don't know. So I don't know exactly how that shook out, but I feel like we are ready to take some more steps. Aaron and Owen, do you guys have anything to add?
No, a lot of good enthusiasm, involvement. We have people from all parts of the community with varied experiences across our district, some with some political experience, others with education experience, been in our buildings, know the state we're in. And I know several members couldn't even attend this evening as well, but I think we've got a really great start with our group, and people are just passionate about making sure that we pass this bond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it felt like to me that a lot of the meeting was just hearing from Jeremy and kind of figuring out what needs to be done and what the structure might look like. And I just got the sense that these people are ready to go out and do as soon as they kind of have those pieces together and they know what it is their steps are. So it was encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. One thing that one of the members that was at the meeting mentioned is it would be really nice to have one person that's connected to each of the schools in our district participating, and we don't quite have that yet. And so folks, and he did mention that the steering team probably needs to be a limited number of people. But when it comes time to do like canvassing or text banks, because he says that they get much more success with text banks than calling banks now. Those kinds of things are going to require a whole lot of people, right? And so there is going to be like a steering committee that, every person probably going to take a chunk of leadership, but then there'll be more opportunities for lots of other people to also get involved. So If you weren't, if people in the audience are watching on video, if you want to be a part of this, you can reach out to me or any board members, I think, and we'll get you connected.
Mhm.
And a huge thank you to those people that are stepping up.
Yep, big time. All
Okay.
right, anything else, Scott?
Nope.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, so that is an action item later tonight. The next item is 6B, Board Superintendent Operating Agreement. So the first attachment on Board Book is the current agreement. We do not have to change it, but if we want to, tonight we have time set aside to discuss any changes. The second attachment is the list from OSBA that we use to, kind of as a brainstorm piece as we developed the original. And then there were some changes that were made kind of last year. So anyway, I just wanted to open up some time and people can comment on, changes or keeping the same. Either way, we don't have to make changes, but I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to make changes.
Is it, excuse me, is it okay to talk about the premise of the agreement as a whole?
Sure.
I have difficulty understanding the need of such specifics and outlined. It seems kind of counter to me to the idea of trust of one another both ways. We have board policy. We have policy that in general terms pretty well umbrellas over all of this. And then this has gotten, for lack of better terminology, almost kind of nitpicky as far as every little piece, what it looks like. And to me, I understand that the idea is to build trust, knowing what to expect from each other. But to me, it's almost a mistrust from the standpoint that these things wouldn't be done just as a natural part of the process under the guides of our policy. I suppose some of this stems from my teaching days. I was probably had the least amount of rules in the building, and you'd probably ask anybody, I probably had the tightest ship in the building. And sometimes you can back yourself into corners with specifics and this sort of thing. And I'll give you one example from the educational point of view. And people could argue this all day. But back when I taught self-contained classroom and I gave spelling tests, standard thing was teachers would make you exchange to grade them. I didn't, because I said as soon as I did that, I was telling that student I didn't trust them. So I let students correct their own. And I find that very high percentage of the time, I'd always peruse over them before I put them in the grade book, but a very high percentage of the time, it was rare for a student to, subvert the rules because I was trusting them. And so, to me, this speaks to mistrust instead of trust. That's just my own bias.
I'm going to speak from my own experience. Just, well, first of all, thanks, Phil, for that input. I've been on the board for 2 years now, and I haven't felt like that the board superintendent operating agreement really has been restrictive in any way. I kind of see us as something that takes our policies and gives a practical meaning to it. Because I agree with you, you know, policies is what sets our, kind of what we're supposed to do. This, in my mind, kind of gives a little more life and kind of a working ways to what our policies state, because they're all backed up by policy. And I'll just say my own experience in the last 2 years, I don't feel like they've ever been restrictive. I think they've helped center us in our meetings, helped center us in what we can do and or the business we need to get done. In all honesty, I think they've helped us center on getting things done amidst some very, very tenuous subjects that we've had to navigate through as a board. Even when we may not all agree or even vehemently disagree with one another. I don't feel like it's anyway been restrictive or that there's any mistrust at all. Again, but that's only my experience.
Well, I guess I didn't do a very good job of expressing myself, I guess. I'm just wondering why the need. You know, if there's trust and if we had the policy, the umbrella policy, why the need? Not necessarily.
Are you referring to the redundancy of using it every meeting, or just having it in general?
That too, but just the whole idea of the need, you know, I guess I just don't get it, you know, because like I said, this is covered in policy, pretty much. And a normal person would assume these are the things. We work on a lot of assumptions with our policies and things already, and would assume this is what would happen. You know, standard. The board, individual members, we may not agree on everything, but once we have something that we've passed, you know, it's done. It's a done deal, and all 7 of us, whether we voted yes or no, we're all support that document, that sort of thing, and that sort of piece. And it's just, to me, it's just another piece of paper, another building. I think sometimes we get too much of this. And this is just an example of when policy is already there.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. The only time I've ever had to see these, I haven't seen them in years, but when things start to go off the rails, when the communication breaks down, it's like, okay, that's what policy's for. Is when things go off the rails, then you retreat into policy and you get your Robert's Rules of Order out and you just and you grind it out.
Right.
But what I've seen is, as we read this at the beginning of our meetings, especially at the larger meetings when there's contentious issues, we read this and the audience hears it, and then they start to perform under this. It norms the behavior to the public.
You think that actually has an
Yeah,
effect?
yes, it does. Yes, it does. I, as someone who's been here a while, I
Yeah.
can see where it just kind of, okay, this is how they're playing the game. This is how those 7 are playing the game. So, Mr. and Mrs. Public, if they want to play the game, they're going to be better receptive if they play by these rules too. And so it kind of norms the behavior. That's what. It's only something that we get to when it starts to come off the rails. And just once in a while reminding. We hear it over and over, and it gets kind of old. But there's a lot of people who listen to this and they hear it the first time. And they go, well, that kind of makes sense, or I guess so. It's, and like I said, it's something that we use when things go off the rails.
My opinion on this is, no, I'm just going to use my athletic background and maybe a couple others, like a code of ethics or a code of standards that almost a lot of companies or teams will use before every game as reminders for just the direction we're on the same kind of time. Yeah, maybe it's like almost like a flag salute, but we do it to remind ourselves this is how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to honor one another. So I'm fine with it personally, because I'm sure there's going to be times that I might, Tom, be a little contentious and have to center myself back. No, I said I'd follow this.
Yeah, or you find yourself wanting to send an email or talk to somebody outside the rules, and you realize that, wait a minute, if I'm doing it, then that allows them to do it, and you just got, no, you
Yeah.
gotta play by the rules, and so.
Yeah, I think having it in one place, because you're right, most of this does come right out of policy. But you know, our policy book is thick, and to try and go, you know, yourself, if each one of us went ourselves, or if the public went through our policy and tried to distill out from that, you know, this work that's been done, I think it wouldn't be, well, one, it wouldn't be uniform. Everybody would have a whole different, you know, list of things that they would gather from that. So I just think it's kind of like not necessarily a lack of trust, but definitely putting everything in one place is certainly helpful. And just as helpful for the public, like Tom said, as it is for us, so that we do all understand what our roles are and what our responsibilities are. I kind of think of it as kind of like a good fences make good neighbors, in kind of a way where it's not that we distrust our neighbor, but having those guidelines there in a visible way, and in a way that we review it and think about it, because, you know, policy is not something that most of us, myself included, are going back, and I mean, from time to time we have to, but it's a good thing to think about at least once a year, maybe more often. Just remind ourselves what we're doing.
I think also putting this into place also helped, honestly, issue in a culture shift within our board. A few years ago, it was quite contentious, you know, being completely open and honest. You know, about 2 years ago, it was a little different. And I consider the last 2 years, the culture has shifted to a much more positive, working, non-contentious, no surprises. You know, everything's done with professionalism and grace, and even some of, like I said, some of the hardest subjects. So I think having this there and present, to Owen's point, it's just kind of given us those fences, those guardrails, that really has kept the culture of our board in a real positive and a focus group.
Well, don't get me wrong. I don't think there's anything, that culture should be there. That culture of being able to agree to disagree and be respectful of one another and everything should be there. I just struggle with the whole concept of
Derek, I want to make sure you.
adults needing this.
Derek, I want to make sure that you have a chance to chime in before I give my remarks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate Phil for bringing it forward so we can have a little bit of thoughtful discussion. I don't have any issues with the overall concept. I think Phil highlights a really good point that these are captured in other policies, but I think it being an outward-facing document to the public and a good reminder for us. I can think of similar practices where you have your governing principles, your governing ethos, and that's what you come back to just as a reminder. But if there was something specific, like in the language that maybe needed to be tweaked, that was giving Phil concern, if it was just the concept in its entirety, like that might be something worth taking a look at. But I think as it stands, I don't have any specific issues at this time.
Thanks, Derek. Just the thoughts that I have when listening to everybody speak. The first thing is I think it's a focus. Yes, we have a lot of other things that guide our behavior, but this is something focused that just helps us be cognizant, and like maybe these are the things that are most helpful out of all that huge list of policies that we have. Also, we have one employee, right? And this is kind of the guidance for that relationship between the board as a whole and our one employee. I failed to mention when we created this was a part of a package with OSBA because they were our superintendent search firm, and this came with the package. Our last superintendent, we had a board superintendent working agreement. I think it's pretty standard across maybe the country. So those were just the things I wanted to make sure that were discussed. Moving forward, are there specific pieces here that we feel we want to keep or that we want to reconsider? This would be the time to kind of bring those things up, and it's fine if we don't.
I just want to make a comment or thank you to Scott. You know, when I texted you like, hey, can I go check this place out or go say hi to so-and-so, you've been super gracious. You know, keeping you in the loop, you know, kind of where I'm at or what I'm doing. And I appreciate that trust you've shown me. So thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, I'm not seeing a whole lot of interest in making a change to the agreement. Without objection, I'll move on to the next topic. Policy first reads. So there's a bunch. The first one is ACAR, discrimination complaint procedure. Before we move forward, did you want to say anything, Dan?
No, I think, you know, I got a few emails and I've kind of got the policies outlined here. So I think, Jennifer, if you just want to go through each one, and then if board members have questions, I think I'm prepared to answer them.
Okay, so discrimination complaint procedure. Is there any questions
No
about that one?
questions, but I would like to point out the irony, maybe it's irony, of all the changes from will to shall. As we were going through our policies last year, we changed a whole bunch of shalls to will, but the only thing that's interesting about that to me is if you do a little bit of research on it, you'll find that will and shall are the two most litigated words in the English language. So I don't think it's necessarily material to what we're doing here, but people who probably are smarter than us
I wondered why those changes were going back to shall.
are
'cause I remember
changing
we
it to
changed
shall,
everything to
so-
will.
Yeah.
We've had a protocol change, I think.
Yeah.
We've had a protocol change, so good catch there, Owen, that yes, some of these will be going back to shall.
Yeah.
Because that's how they come to us from OSBA, I'm
Correct.
assuming.
Yeah.
Shall is generally considered more forceful, isn't it?
Well, it depends on what you read.
You just opened the can of worms.
Yeah. Depends on which judge you ask.
All right, let's go to number 2, which is criminal records checks and fingerprinting.
Now, I will say on this one that this is an AR, and so the policy itself did not change. And so I know Derek had at least a question on this as well, and I did send you the policy. So I'm not sure if that helped or not, but if you or anybody have any questions on this one, I'll do my best to answer them.
I think that's a good point when we go through this, that we are not approving ARs. The ARs are there for our reference, and we can cross-check those with the policy. And when we, when we do these as a batch after the third read, we're really just approving the policies, not the ARs, because that is in the administration lane, whereas the policies are lane and what we're responsible for. Okay, I don't see anybody wanting to speak about this.
Derek.
Oh, Derek.
Yeah, sorry, just because I did meet with Dan, I had a couple questions, obviously on the AR side, and I think we got some resolution. There was a couple things that did stick out to me. One, just when it talked about criminal record check, it seemed to use state and nationwide criminal checks interchangeably, and I think that we should be precise in that language, depending on the position. If we only did a statewide criminal check, we could potentially miss a criminal conviction that was out of state that would potentially preclude someone from a conviction. And so that was something that was discussed, and I think we were going to take a look at that. Dan, did you have a chance to dive into that at all?
I did not. Was that contained in the policy I sent you? Did it specify on that?
I don't think it did. I think that was the AR that we were looking at. And again, Jen just kind of reminded me of the lane, but that was just a general concern that I saw there, but I didn't see it specifically in the policy.
And I will make sure I get a clear answer back to you on when we use state or national.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else have anything on this?
Yeah, Dan, I think this morning I was asking you for clarity. Essentially, anybody who comes in contact with students or is going to be generally on property is getting fingerprinted, correct?
Yes, if they're on campus, so if you had questioned about contractors
Yeah.
and whatnot, and so if we have a contractor who's going to be working in a school building while students are present, we're going to make sure that the contractor has gone through and that their employees are fingerprint checked. But sometimes, like for instance, we have some contractors right now who they're coming into the building, they're not fingerprint checked, but part of the reason we're allowing them in, which the AR allows the superintendent to do that, is because students are not present.
Okay. Let's move on to sexual harassment.
On this one, I had a question for Dan concerning the language on reporting and the language in it is reporting to a specific person, which is compliance officer, which is in this case is Dan, specifically to him. But then right after that, it makes reference to reporting to basically any district employee. So it didn't seem consistent to me. Dan basically said that
Well,
sometimes.
part of this, it's very complicated because you have a federal statute and a state guideline
Oh, this is on the Oregon procedure.
Right, and so I think that it comes to, as the compliance officer and assigning to determine whether it's appropriate for the principal to handle it, or if it's gonna fall under Title IX, that has to be a Title IX trained investigator, which we have 2 in the district.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I would agree that it's not very clear as to, you have says who the reports are supposed to go to, and then the step 1, doesn't say who necessarily the investigator is on that.
Right.
Where is that at?
Oh,
So that's in the JBA, GBN, AR.
Oh, not in the AR, in the policy
it's a
itself is where I was talking. In GBA, GBN.
Phil, do you know what page?
I'm trying to,
It's very
I
long.
think it's the second page.
yeah, I think it is too, in the
Second page,
talks about,
like under Oregon procedures, I think it's the 4th or 5th paragraph down.
then goes to, then it goes to a district official. In that first paragraph under response.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas just above that, it says, report to Dan. And,
It's probably because that's just what the law says, I'm assuming, because we get these from OSBA, right?
Correct. So yeah,
anyway, that kind of bothered me because there wasn't consistency there for a person looking at it as far as, okay, one hand it says report to a specific person, but then there it says
Yeah, could it,
basically,
I agree, it's kind of weird.
It-
Designated
it-
a district official?
it just seems
I mean, we
kind of
could
odd
add that
me.
to be designated district official or to the compliance officer.
Yeah, to make it specific.
Well, again, I think this, comes from OSBA, which is coming from the statute, and so I think I actually checked in a couple other districts that, and the language is identical.
Because they just took it from OSBA.
Yeah.
I guess my point is, doesn't make it right just because it came from OSBA.
Yeah, but it might be, it could be that we reach back out to OSBA and ask about that. Dan, do you think that's reasonable?
I think that's reasonable.
Is the verbiage that we have now, is this our like, this isn't our final read, this is.
It's first read.
The first
So
read.
usually you spend your time in the first reads to make sure that there's stuff that does, if it doesn't make sense, you ask questions and you make suggestions,
Okay.
and then having the three reads allows the public to get more involved.
So there's underneath like the investigation side, it's like the third page. It says the district may take, but it's not limited to the following procedures. Line 1 is discipline of staff and students. Number 2 says removal of third parties engaged. Is that dismissal from the district? What is removal supposed to mean? Because that's pretty, like, from the school, from the district, from the environment. Like, that's one that I was curious about.
I'm assuming it's from from the environment.
And 30 parties usually means somebody that's not an employee of the district. It's somebody. Okay. And then just above it, use reasonable person standard. That's not something I'm familiar with, Owen.
So you have to
reasonable-
have, go ahead.
Well, the reasonable person standard in the law is kind of somewhat amorphous, but the idea is that it's used in a lot of areas of law. For example, when you're talking about negligence standards, what would a reasonable person operating under those circumstances do? And so it allows you to look back at this kind of a idea of what would that person have done in an objective setting. And so it's amorphous because you and I can differ on what was a reasonable in that circumstance. But that's super common standard,
Legal verbiage for
standard,
that.
yeah.
So you have a reasonable person standard, you have a preponderance of evidence standard, which is a little bit higher, and then you have, kind of more of the
Beyond reasonable doubt.
beyond a reasonable
Reasonable
doubt.
Good. Thanks, Owen. I don't have. That's all I have.
Any other questions, concerns? You want to piggyback? I mean, my only solution to the idea about, the bit that Phil points out is to ask OSBA, why is it that way? Does it have to be that way? Could we change it to the compliance officer or whatever? I don't want to give you more work, Dan. I just.
Debbie is the person who contacts OSBA for me,
Okay.
so,
Sorry, Debbie.
yeah.
I guess it would just seem reasonable that you would report to an official that you're comfortable with. Say I'm working at Butte Creek. I don't know Dan, but I know my principal, and I can report to them. And I think there's something in there like that. But
Oh, I get that, but
that's not how it's written.
That's not.
No,
yeah.
agreed. But anyway.
Yeah, like,
I think-
who is a district official? Is a teacher a district official?
It makes it
I
very
would say that teachers
precise,
don't
and then it
want
kind of
this.
opens it up to anybody.
Yes, exactly. But I think OSBA can help clarify that.
Yeah.
Just to add, I think, Dan, when you and I spoke about this specific issue, I think there was a mention that, like, at some point, all of the complaints would get filtered through, not that you have to be the initial source. Is that
That is
that
correct.
accurate?
Yeah.
So you may be the recipient at some point in time receiving all of the complaints, but you don't have to be the first person to receive the complaint.
That is correct.
I think still the word district official isn't specific enough. I think it's slippery. Well, let's just put it that way. Because I think you could say, oh, a teacher's a district official. Well, I
Yeah.
don't think a teacher wants responsibility for,
Right.
Yeah.
hearing
Seems
about
open
sexual
to,
harassment.
Yeah, who this
Open
person
to
is.
interpretation.
Yeah. All right, so Debbie is gonna follow up on that. The next one on the list is sexual harassment complaint procedure, and that is the AR. And again, that's really for our
reference, it's not in our lane to really direct staff to change that, but we can ask questions. And yeah, so let's move to
Well,
that one.
I guess overall, my question on this one, I had several questions, but it all sums up to basically the same thing. In your steps on the AR, it's very specific as far as what the investigation will look like. Then when it starts talking about other individuals, whether it be principal, district officials, superintendent, board members, whatever, then it starts talking about skipping step one and going to step two, which when we talked about, well, it's implied, but implying, three different people can say it implies different things. I'm just, I guess, curious, why doesn't it all start at that, whether it's me or a teacher, start at that step one, and it's just who the person investigating changes, to the immediate supervisor, so to speak. It seems like it would be cleaner language and would look like, to me, this could give the appearance of administrators or board members are being treated different than a classroom teacher is, or a classroom aide, the way it's done here.
Yeah,
And I realize we don't give approval on this, but I'm just
Yeah,
saying
no, I
how
think
it
it's
how it looks.
Yeah, and I think that there's been, used to really just have one complaint policy and procedure, and that was KL.
Yeah.
And over the last several years, there's been multiple complaint procedures, depending on the subject, that have been added because of legislation that have come in the way of policy and new ARs. And so I think to try to align those steps, OSBA has come in and said, we're going to they're going to look a lot the same in terms of step one, step two, and step three. And so my email to Phil, the inference that he's talking about is that I said that I felt like the guidelines for step one don't change. It's just where the process starts, and the fact that step two is going to start at more of a district level investigation of, let's say, a principal or something like that, that the guidelines would stay. It's just the step in the process before it gets to the board changes. So,
But do you see what I'm talking about in the step one in the document? It's got all those specifics very put out there as what would be done.
mm-hmm.
And as soon as you say we'll start at step two, that's the same thing as saying we're not going to do step one.
Well, I think that having investigated complaints at a step two level, that I go back and go through what would have been done at step one is just the idea that there isn't that person's appeal process has lost a step because.
Right.
But as far as the actions that a step two investigator is
Well,
going
then maybe
to do.
those should be separated.
I think I'm gonna
See, I think
I'm going to cut us off here because I think we need to focus on the policies because we don't have any power when it comes to the ARs. So I want to reserve our meeting time for talking about just the policies. They give us these ARs as a courtesy, and I think feedback has been given, and unless anybody else has any more feedback on that AR, I'm going to leave that in the administrative lane, and we'll move on to.
I do have one response that I want to give that Josh and I talked about on an AR related to retaliation or non-retaliation, because I was able to give that some thought today after we spoke. And I just want to point out, Josh had some concerns about, there's obviously very strict non-retaliation language in that policy. And I just want to, a lot of this legislation came around after the Me Too movement, and wanting to make sure that we weren't victim blaming people and that we were creating a safe opportunity for people to come forward. Mm-hmm. But I also want to say that there is one sentence in there that talks about that holding people accountable for false reporting isn't a form of retaliation in there. And I want to say that, you know, our administrators and people trained to do this, you know, are capable of distinguishing those two. But it's important to have a strong stance to say we're not going to, we are going to believe kids and we're going to take them seriously. And we can still also have the ability to look at something that was potentially intentionally false. So I just wanted to, I appreciate that question, Josh, because it gave me some time to kind of think through why that legislation was, and that, you know, we have the capability of doing both, even though the length of the non-retaliation language is obviously longer and stronger.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dan. Thank you.
Sorry, I want to cut in as well. And Jen, I know you want to move us forward back onto policy, but I did talk to Dan about the complaint form, and I think it's important to mention in that complaint form, under evidence of sexual harassment, we talked about photos and how it may be a better question to phrase like the location of evidence as opposed to actually attaching or sending photos, depending on the nature of those photographs. If they're of a minor and they're explicit and those were sent to, you know, an administrator or someone that's in the process, that could be problematic. So again, that's, you know, outside of our lane, but I thought it was important to mention just to prevent a potential negative outcome.
Yeah, so I think that so if you're on that AR1, there's a sexual harassment complaint form. So we will, I did notify Derek McElfresh, who helps me with these, to make that clear that we don't want people submitting evidence that could actually have them do something illegal. So that we would, what I think that Derek Foxworth and I talked about was having it say, where's the evidence located, versus asking them to submit evidence that might be illegal for them to do.
Okay. Moving on then to the Title IX Sexual Harassment Response and Complaint Procedure. I'll just ask, why do we have to have two? Why do we have to have Title IX one plus
Yeah,
a
that's a good
regular
question.
one?
I was more on the same thing.
Because this was passed federally that everybody has to do this. So, and Title IX, which obviously used to be, you know, more associated with sports and equal facilities for women and men's sports, it's been broadened to in terms of what happens in terms of sexual harassment complaints. So,
Any comments on that? All right, we're going to move on then to hazing, harassment, intimidation, bullying, menacing, cyberbullying, or teen dating violence reporting process. So this is an AR, again. We can give feedback, but we cannot direct staff on the AR.
Just question, looking at it, the removal of domestic violence, was there a reason?
you know, it was never in the policy, the AR, to begin with. And so when we were updating this, this was unique to Silver Falls. It predates me. And so when we were updating this, it's being removed. And Derek Foxworth did catch that step one still maintained the domestic violence language in there. So that'll be struck out when it comes up for second read. But it's not in, not in this AR originally or from OSBA, and so we're not sure what it originated into the district, but we're moving into alignment with OSBA's AR on this.
All right, moving on to expulsion. Okay, moving on to public complaints, KL.
On KL, I was wondering about the taking out of the language of where the board would have decision to make whether to hear or not hear the complaint, and that has been taken out. and board action. So, and from my research, I find that most districts don't have that exclusion.
Can you point out where that's at, Phil? in the-
Yeah.
Is that too?
It's,
I think it's the second page.
first paragraph.
Thank you.
Okay. Starts with any complaint about school. That one?
Right, right. And says decision made by the superintendent's final before, and the part was taken out before consideration by the board. And then it says, board will not hear against.
Oh, that's because it's about personnel, because that's not our lane, that's not what we do. We had, and I don't know if you guys, for new board members, we had an attorney consult with us on this one, because we did have a complaint and it was personnel related. And the attorney was Jolly Patterson, who is from Garrett Heeman Robertson, right?
Miller Nash in Portland.
Oh, Miller Nash. And she's an attorney, specializing in school law, and also used to be the board secretary for Portland Public. And she strongly urged us to make these changes because it makes it really clear. Like, basically what we had to do is, when we address the complaint and say, you know, this is not our job, this is not the board member's job to comment on personnel matters, unless, like, there's a point where we are after the superintendent makes the decision, then you know, we can be appealed to, and so this changes the policy so that it's clearer for everybody reading it that we don't. That's not our role, is it to be in personnel matters.
Well, I guess I'm confused, because when you say there are circumstances and then there aren't, what are the circumstances?
So we had a teacher who was dismissed that we had to hear.
Mhm.
So in that case, we're involved.
But that followed the whole process by which, you know, that went through the whole personnel process.
Right.
It was not a complaint.
It was not a complaint. It was gone through multiple steps and then finally appealed to the board, which is outlined in policy as well.
Mm.
And that's when, you know, as board, we have to be final adjudicator if it makes it up through those steps.
Right.
But if there's an initial complaint, which this is, as I'm reading, this is applying to, someone couldn't come in a board meeting and say,
So this is
Yeah.
Simon, that we don't have a Mr. Smith administrator,
Yeah.
do we? That Mr. Smith, I don't like him.
Mm-hmm.
This covers that.
Right.
But what about Mr. Smith procedurally did something not right and the parent complained about it?
And it goes to Dan.
But does
So it depends
stop
on what-
at the
depends on what
superintendent,
the-
is what my point is.
Depends on what the parent's remedy of the situation is. So if the parents, if the parent, or I'm using a parent, but, you know, the
Yeah,
complainant.
anybody. Joe Citizen.
The complainant, if the complainant's remedy is they want the decision that the principal made overturned, that would be different. And that could go through up to the board to say that the principal's decision was wrong. We want the decision to be reversed because the principal's decision goes against policy or something like that. That could be adjudicated to the board level. But if the complainant's remedy is disciplinary action against somebody for, you know, for whatever the situation is, the board's not in a position to take employment action or disciplinary action.
Right, in that case. But in that first case, could that come through the complaint process?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well,
This is any complaint about school personnel. That's, Dan's first example was about an action, not about personnel. So we don't take action on personnel unless it's, you know, that kind of situation where there's been, you know, superintendent's made a final call and there's been an appeal to us, and then we have, that's our role. But if it's just about, yeah, so this is a clarity
issue about the types of things that we hear and we do not hear.
And
Well, okay.
Jennifer?
I guess I'm kind of bothered. I did a lot of research on this and I couldn't find a district that had it worded this way.
That's because it comes from OSBA, and everybody just takes the OSBA language.
we're-
And we've had,
So we're trailblazers?
well, because we had a situation, we had a complaint,
Yeah.
and the remedy was requested, was a personnel matter, and that's just not something that we deal with on a complaint level.
This is consistent with our public comment policy as well.
Yes.
Board will not hear complaints against individual district
Yeah.
staff or board members.
Yes.
Well, I think it's also fair to the, to the district employee as well. I mean, I know you spent your whole career in education, that it would be unfair if me as a parent and came and lodged a complaint against you as a teacher if I haven't either number one, talked to you about it, or number two, gone to the principal. It's just not fair, and it doesn't follow policy. And again, it's a personnel matter if you're not doing your job, right?
Right,
Which,
right.
again, as a board, we don't have the control over that.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and I think the point that Jolly Patterson made is it puts the district at risk if the board were to take an employment action that, without going through due process. And so that's, yeah, I mean, Phil, you're right. There's not a lot of policies that have that language struck out, but after having that experience and based on Jolly's recommendation, and the one thing that we have to do in policy is to at least, our policy does have to state where a process stops at. And so that is why it was important to have it very clear where the policies, where a procedure were to stop. Because in that situation, I think it was kind of a little bit difficult for the board, because the board, I think ultimately decided it was upholding the superintendent, but there was no hearing. It was just upholding the superintendent's decision on that particular complaint, which I think if a complainant thought that they were going to get an audience with the board and then didn't get one, I think that creates frustration for that complainant, thinking that they're going to get an audience with the board, to find out that the board is going to, no, we're going to support the superintendent's recommendation because it's a personnel matter. And so that put a little bit of,
Yes,
I think that was tough for the board.
we had to have an attorney come in to help us through that situation because our policy wasn't clear.
Okay. It just,
I do recommend going back and looking at that video.
oh, I did.
Okay.
I
yeah,
sent
I
a
did.
link
I
to
did.
it, so yeah.
Yeah.
I just, it doesn't necessarily follow at other steps, and so it just kind of bothered me that it did on this.
All right, moving on, without objection, going on to the AR. Anybody have any input for staff on the AR that goes along with that? Okay, moving on to public comment. This is specific to discussion and action items. If you'd like to speak during public comment and are attending virtually, use the raise hand feature on Zoom. If you're attending in person, please approach the public comment table located in front of the board. Would you like to give public comment tonight? This is Celeste Richardson, who I mentioned before, just became one of our PAC co-chairs, so. That's highly irregular. I usually wouldn't do that, but thank you very much. Is there anybody online that wants to give public comment?
No hands raised.
I'm not going to read the statement then.
Okay.
But we did want to give public comment. It's usually not something we do during a work session, but because of the gravity of the ballot language, and because it was the first time the ballot language had been published to Board Book, we wanted to just give a chance for public comment, and so we don't have any. Okay, the next action, or the action item that we have is resolution number 724-2023, resolution of Silver Falls School District Number 4J, calling a measure election for general obligation bonds and related matters. So we do have more time for discussion right now, or I can take a motion.
I move to approve resolution number 7-24-2023, a resolution of Silver Falls School District number 4J, calling a measure election for general obligation bonds and related matters.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve resolution number 7-24-23, a resolution of Silver Falls School District number 4J, calling a measure election for general obligation bonds and related matters. I'm assuming we're not going to want to discuss because we discussed before, but you do have the option, so stop me if you want to discuss. Otherwise, Debbie's going to take our vote.
And this is what's going in the voter pamphlet?
Yep.
Awesome.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Josh,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Derek,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
all in favor.
All right. Without objection, meeting adjourned.